Okay, guys, we'll call this meeting to order. And Vanessa, you're going to skip to which agenda item?
Number 3.
Number 3?
Yes.
So we're moving around. We'll ask, does anybody have to leave early besides anybody? Let's say 4-1, you can leave 4-1. Work on that. Barbara leaves at 12:30.
Okay. I'll just go ahead. I didn't tell her she was first until like 10 minutes. Okay, good morning. Can you all hear me? Yes. Okay. At the last TREC Commission meeting, the Commission requested an overview of the TREC advisory committees, including what advisory committees do, which advisory committees do we have, where do they come from. So I put together a little bit of a presentation for you, so you should be able to see it on one of these 2 screens. We'll go ahead and get started. So this is just a summary of what we'll cover today. We'll look at the role of advisory committees and the commission. We'll do an overview of each current committee, current chairs, each committee's current area of focus, because that changes, and then how staff participates at the advisory committee level. So I'll back up just a little bit and say, so we have advisory committees at the commission. What they do is they meet in between your quarterly meetings to discuss areas within their subject matter purview, which we'll get into as I go through each committee. And they go back and forth on topics relevant to what that committee does, and then at some point they will vote and make a formal recommendation to bring something forward to the commission for its consideration. And you'll see that. You'll see sometimes in those reports from the chairs of the committees, you'll see just an update, and sometimes you'll see this is a formal recommendation from the committee. The one that always pops into my mind that I think most people remember was the 3-hour contracts rule from Esac. That was a formal recommendation from Esac, and that went back and forth for a while. So we'll walk through this. I'm going to cover the first 2 committees are a little bit different than your standard advisory committee. I did not put in here the commission liaisons because when I made this presentation, we did not know if there would be a change in this. But I'll just walk you through. So the first is the Baroque Voyeur committee, which is a little bit of a different beast in that it is a statutorily created committee. It consists of 6 members appointed by the commission. And some of you participated in that selection committee process this last round of getting 2 new, they ended up being broker members, or they're both brokers, but they're commission appointed members. And then there are 6 members that are appointed by the State Bar of Texas, and unsurprisingly, those are the lawyer members. And so there's also the governor's office appoints 1 public member, similar to how you have public members on the commission. And the new public member that was just appointed, I believe, comes from a title background, which is interesting. I think will be really beneficial to the committee overall. So the members serve staggered 6-year terms, which is a long time, but just given the amount of time it takes to come up to speed, and this is an intense process looking at these contract forms, ends up working out really well to have folks serve such a long term. So the committee regularly reviews the TREC contract forms. Those are, as you all know, those are the forms that we put out there for use for real estate transactions. There's a number of them, and broker lawyer committee owns that process of review and updating before it gets to the commission level. So this group will get together, they will look at the different forms, areas of interest, the commission has indicated some areas of concern, or if the committee itself, there are folks who have ideas, things that they've looked at, public comment, etc. They will take a look at the forms, they will suggest revisions and changes, and if you've not watched a broker lawyer committee meeting, it is super interesting. You will learn more in, I think, 45 minutes of watching one of those meetings than you would expect. And really the in-depth knowledge you'll see that these folks have of the contract forms and what, a change here, oh, we've got to look because down here it's referenced and that potentially has, and some impact over this, which could, then attach to the addendum. And so you'll watch that entire process. And I think it's really fascinating for anyone. I think agents, brokers, I think watching these meetings is a really good tool. So what happens is the group will come to some consensus on contract form changes. Because changes to the contract forms are a pretty big deal as it relates to the industry, because everyone relies on these forms. They try not to routinely change the forms. We just had a pretty big, we just had some pretty significant changes to the contract forms about a year ago. So right now what the committee's doing, I mentioned this in the report, is they're working on their wish list. So they threw out a bunch of ideas and things they want to look at. They're creating some working groups, and they're just sort of starting to take a look at what they may propose for the next round of contract changes. So what happens is once they've finalized the changes that they want to do, so let's go back to the last round, there were some changes to paragraph 5, there were major changes to 4, there were some new disclosures. They brought all of that forward to the commission in a meeting. What the commission can do is, because all those contract forms go out for proposal via the rulemaking process, the commission votes whether to post those to the register for public comment and publication. The commission will then also vote on the adoption, and the process is TREC will approve all the changes or reject the changes in their entirety with feedback. It's not just a no. And the committee will go back and they will look at it and they will, adjust the language accordingly. But that's a discussion that they have on their end too. It's actually, go to the next slide. There's an MOU in place that addresses the relationship between the commission and the broker lawyer committee, and so it documents a process for when there is a disagreement as it relates to the changes. I don't think we've seen that in a very long time. But if you remember with the changes to paragraph 5 with the option fee, those actually were proposed and then not recommended to move forward just based on all the comments that we were receiving. And so went back to the broker lawyer committee. They made some changes in response to insight from the commission, insight from those public comments, and then they went out for re-proposal and then eventual adoption. Okay, next. So the current chair is Ron Walker, the co-chair. So Ron Walker is the broker member chair currently, and talk about a wealth of knowledge. I routinely email and call him with questions on those contract forms. He's got he is true history. He knows these forms. That's amazing. And he would probably be assuming why I'm saying all of this in public meeting, but he's a wonderful chair. And we are looking at election of an attorney chair. We had Charles Kramer for a very long time. He rolled off. We're going to do elections at the next in-person meeting, which is this spring. So what are they looking at? What's on their wish list? There has been a hard money transactions working group, and I joke that this is the hard money versus hard-ish money obtained via private financing, so we're looking at some language to address that. If you're interested in what that language looks like, we can get it to you. It's in the materials, yes, okay. There's some proposed changes to paragraph 7F regarding repairs, delivery of warranties, documentation related to those repairs. They are looking at, so generally speaking, they're holding on making changes related to the changes that were most recently made. They're, you know, I think a lot of folks initially were like, this option, earnest money, you know, no way, this isn't gonna work. We've seen that it hasn't been, you know, the sky has not fallen on that issue. It's been a process change. There's certainly been pickups on individual cases. But the form that we keep getting comments on is the HOA. And so they are looking at that language. I think they've got some new language that they're playing around with. So you may see some changes that are resulting from public comments. We've been encouraging, you know, I have folks coming to me asking me questions, saying, you know, get what their concerns, and I'll always tell them to direct it to Baroque Voyeur, because Baroque Voyeur Committee spends the majority of its meetings walking through each and every public comment it receives. And I think there's going to be some changes as a result of those comments. And the other thing I mentioned this yesterday, there's a farm and ranch working group, and as I understand it, there are a lot of folks that would like, in the industry, that would like the committee to put some focus on the farm and ranch contract. Just take a look at it, review it, see does it need some updates. They're looking at some oral lease language right now, some disclosure related to the natural resource leases, service leases, things like that. So we'll see some stuff coming out of that. Okay, so that's Baroque Voyeur Committee. And next up is the Texas Real Estate Inspector Committee. So this committee is also a little bit different, right? This is a statutorily created committee. It's under 1102 of the Applications Code, which is the Inspector Chapter, what I call it. There's a corresponding rule that we have, 535.206, and that gets a little bit into membership and duties and what they do, but really it's a statutorily created committee. It's my understanding that it used to be a little bit more broad. It's narrow. Committee responsibilities of the committee in the next slide. So the committee will recommend rules for licensed inspectors, and that's going to include, and so instead of it being sort of parsed out where you see Esac or you see corporate responsibility, they cover it all. So qualifying education, experience requirements, examinations, FCE in there, continuing education, yep. They also recommend rules as they relate to application forms, fees, the standards of practice, which we just saw, the code of conduct, and ethics. And so statute actually says that the commission shall consider the committee's recommendations related to the qualifications of licensing inspectors. And that's because that group is made up mostly of inspectors, and I'll get into a second, there's some public members, but these are the folks that really know their industry, and they can make recommendations at really a level of expertise that is invaluable to the commission when it's making these decisions. So 9 total members, 6 are engaged in the practice of real estate inspection for at least 5 years and are currently actively engaged. And it's a 6-year term. You also have 3 public members, and they serve 2-year terms, but we're seeing some really active public members right now. So that's exciting. They're really weighing in on the stuff that's going on with that group. They just elected a new chair, so it used to lead Warren. I don't think but the new chair is Sean Emmerich, and he got up and he gave a report yesterday. He was very involved in the standards of practice review. And he will be a real asset to that committee, and I think at least it's got a little bit of a different perspective, and I'm excited to see what happens. So the committee just wrapped up 2 big projects, the new inspector education rules, which we saw earlier last year. I'm trying to think, that was the whole, there's a whole series of rules and also one of regulatory compliance. So that was a big undertaking. And the new inspector standards of practice, which there were a lot of working, or I think actually subcommittee meetings, and then it goes forward to the inspectors, they review it, there's comments, and that's a whole process. It's a big deal in the inspector world, so they're just wrapping that up. So they've really just finished up with 2 pretty significant projects. I will say, before I start Esac, I'll say Tony Slagle is really our lead with the inspector committee. He's got an established relationship with them, and he's really, I would say, sort of the staff liaison, but we've also got Mike from enforcement and Tony Renteria attend those meetings pretty routinely and provide their insight on what they see from an enforcement standpoint, what these changes would mean, et cetera. So they are huge help in that regard, and really are getting the inspector message out there, which is important. So next up is Esac, the Education Standards Advisory Committee. So Esac is established in TREC rule, so this one's a little bit different. We've got TREC rule 535.43, and so they regularly review and revise curriculum standards, course content requirements, and instructional qualifications for qualifying and continuing education courses. So the new chair is Charles Porter, and he gave his report yesterday. And so we expect to see, it was Kalei, I'm glad she was great, and Charles was the vice chair, he's since been elected into this, and I'm excited to see where Charles takes this group. We've already, Jennifer and I had an email from him today with all of his ideas in response to his presentation yesterday, so I think that's neat. And then we've got 12 members, they're serving staggered 2-year terms. Anyone who's done Esac selection committee knows that that one is a little bit of heavy lifting, just on with the 2-year terms and trying to get everything sorted. We've got 7 license holders, 4 education providers, and 1 public member. So what is Esac doing right now? Charles talked a little bit about it yesterday. They are currently reviewing the concept of a course related to the broker-agent relationship, or where room for additional information related to this topic could fit into existing courses. The chair yesterday mentioned real estate finance course, and we've had there's a member, Chuck Jacobus, who's currently going through the outlines of the current courses to see where this topic could be better highlighted in the event that they don't go the route of the course. I don't think the intent is to increase education hours, but to make a course that would be available and would fit into the scheme that's really going to address this topic that came up yesterday, right? And that I think will come up forever because it's probably one of the most important topics that we will all see out there, which is an understanding of the broker-agent relationship and what is required of the broker and what is required of an agent. What should the agent know that their broker is responsible for and when to go to them, and what should brokers, really importantly, know their obligations are to their agents. And I think the hope is that that relationship is established and everyone knows it, but what we see and what we hear is that that's not the case. And so TREC this is an idea that was born a little bit out of the broker responsibility working group, out of input from just folks that the comments that we hear, and so we, Jennifer, Tony, Abby, and I got together and we thought, let's put this to Esac and see what they say. I'm not sure right now where that's going to come down. They're just sort of batting it around and trying to figure that out. And the chair gave some insight yesterday. And I thought that was helpful, so we'll see. They're going to also begin a review of and update to some of the core qualifying course outlines. One of those being property management. In that broker responsibility working group had some comments related to property management, and the thought was maybe we need to take a look at that course outline and let Esac see So, okay, it's like the chair is here.
Pardon our tardiness, but we spoke with the Texas workers today.
To excuse the chair.
Do what?
A motion to excuse the chair.
Yes, please. I'll second it. See Chelsea's on.
Now that you're here, we're trying to just make sure that you were here for the initiatives, not all the time. So we ease slowly into the day. So I'm just beginning, Chair Kessner, we're doing the oversight of the advisory committees, and I just finished up with Esac. We've done broker lawyer, we've done inspector, which actually the chairs are involved with both of those committees. So perfect. So next up is the broker responsibility working group. This version of the broker responsibility working group was actually the first committee we had that went through the selection committee process. And that was a significant undertaking in that it was an entirely new group of folks. So instead of, sometimes with these selection committees, you're getting 2 or 3 members and an alternate. This was everybody. And there were a lot of applications, as I recall. So this group was established by the chair of the commission to examine the various current issues relating to the topic of broker responsibility. It's a pretty broad charge. So Chair Kessner and the commission have given some insight onto what they would like this group to consider, but this group also comes to the table with reasons why they wanted to be on this working group. And you'll see results from those reasons. And I'll get to that a little bit in a minute, but they've got a little bit of a broader scope, I would say. So this specific group has been tasked with making a recommendation to the commission related to license portability, education experience requirements, and military spouse licensing, which, as some of you may recall, Commissioner Lerner, then her chair of the BRWG position, made a recommendation last November. What I have done is I have taken that recommendation as it relates to portability, education experience, and military spouse licensing, and I drafted a white paper, which once that is finalized as part of your initiatives, we will circulate to everyone. And it may not instantly seem clear as to why all of those are tied together, and I believe that the white paper really walks you through how portability ultimately ends up tying with education experience just based on what Texas requirements are. And we've got some special provisions as it relates to military and military spouse licensing and looking for some direction there. So to be continued, that recommendation has been made, and I have been deep in it trying to get a white paper that really walks everyone through it. And so currently this group is looking into the topic of commission outreach, which I think with the addition of summer, a lot of those ideas we're going to start seeing come to fruition. So there's a pretty significant discussion on that and what folks think would be really helpful. And I think now we can start implementation. Summer is probably making us at least stop casually throwing things at me to do, which I routinely do throughout the day. Oh, I have this idea. So we've got that. We've got the topic of mentorship, which is, I would say, the current hot topic. This is where we are. They are engaged in, benefits of mentorship. What would mentorship look like? What can the commission do as it relates to mentorship? Also being mindful of governor's directive, legislative changes, barriers to entry, etc. So I think this is really the hot topic. You saw the chair Chance come up yesterday and talk about, perhaps increasing that the number of transactions to be supervised. We've got some folks who would like to see, I've got written comments from 2 members of their ideas of what they'd like to see that supervision look like, what a mentorship program would look like, and I'm going to walk through their comments just just to see, you know, what could that look like from a legal standpoint, and also from a staff, you know, staff are the ones that touches these applications, they're the ones who review things, et cetera. So that's a pretty big undertaking, but we can really see that there's a lot of passion for it. I know Commissioner Meyer has a passion for it. I think you're the one that brought it up to the group, but you're seeing, you know, everyone in that group is responding to this topic. I think there's a lot of ideas, and I love those ideas, even though sometimes I have to be a little bit of the, well, we need to think about this. But this is a really interesting group. The current chair, Chance Brown, who you saw yesterday, he replaced Commissioner Meyer, though she remains as an active commission liaison. We've got Chair Miller also active, you were chair. Commissioner Miller and Commissioner Russell. So we're seeing a lot of Chair Gessner's often in those meetings. We've got 12 broker members, so it's a little bit of a different makeup. You saw this yesterday. There were recommendations to the full commission related to getting that property management review over to Esac, mentorship of agents, some requests for guidance, just throwing out some ideas. And then this is an interesting one, having staff look into a rule similar to that verbal responsibility rule that would require an agent to respond to parties in a transaction within 2 calendar days. So that I think will be up for, there hasn't been, language has not been drafted, et cetera. So that's something that staff will work on, bring back to the group, that ultimately it will be before the commission. Okay, so I'm almost done, but I wanted to just give you some insight into the staff participation at the committee meetings. Of course, Amber coordinates all the meetings, arranges travel, she prepares the meeting minutes, which is an incredible task. I don't know how she does it. I think she does the video parts too. So she does that. She acts in a similar capacity as she does for this commission. She's really that go-to person. And then we've got Summer, our new communications director, Summer Mandel. She coordinates all the outward-facing messaging. She's writing these committee meeting recaps, which I mentioned yesterday. We're trying to do that with all the committees to get something out. Just, you know, here's what we're talking about. Here's what it means. You know, here's where you can provide public comment if there's a rule, et cetera. So we're really working on getting that messaging out so that folks know, oh, this is what Esac's looking at. Oh, this is what you're talking about. I have a great passion for that. I want to, you know, be a part of that meeting. And then she's also going to be helping. There are certain chairs of committees who like to write their own articles, and so she'll help with that process too. So General Counsel Office, Abby and I both, we work with the chairs of the committee on matters related to open meetings. We advise on the relevant controlling statutes, rules, and then also just potential policy implications, practical implementation issues, things like that. So we're really there to be a resource, and also to just know when things, you know, oh, this could be problematic because of this, or, you know, that might not work, but maybe this would work. But I'll tell you the real deal on that is the next bullet point. We've got some subject matter experts in every meeting, and so we've got folks who provide standard reports, right? We've got Tim Mayo does a report at every Esac on enforcement actions that they've seen. We've got, I will say, sort of the dream team, because I rely on them so heavily. They have to have, you know, numerous pre-meetings to discuss what's going to happen in these committee meetings or even these work, like the small working groups. So we've got Michael Malloy, Director of Enforcement, is always on hand in these meetings and somehow able to answer just any question that comes out of this. What is the number of this? What does this look like? What are you seeing? So he can provide that enforcement standpoint. He's also got some historical knowledge that's really helpful. We've got Jennifer Wheeler, who, you know, these Esac meetings, I sit back, which is lovely. No, but she knows everyone. She's very engaged. She'll come forward with outlines. She can answer the questions on well, how is this done now? What courses are there now? What's the process for this? And so she's really a lead on the Esac front. And then I'll go to Denise Sample, who, I think she's here today. She's in every one of these meetings because she's our licensing person. And so she can provide the insight that, and I'm not sure this was always present in these meetings of like, well, actually, when you look at how the licensing process works, we need to be mindful of this, this, and this. This doesn't tie to this necessarily, but it could tie to this. And so we're looking, we want to see how is it right now, and is there potential for change, and how would that change fit in, or is it not the exact change that they're looking at? What are some alternate ideas? And so Denise can really be a foothold when it comes to licensing, because we never want to say, yes, let's do this great idea, and then it turns out, that great idea would completely disrupt our entire licensing process. And if we had just asked her, she could have told us and then come up with an alternate route. So I think we're really seeing that subject matter expertise come forward in these committee meetings in a way that we haven't before, and it's really been beneficial on these recommendations. And so in meetings to answer questions, we also serve as resources for any research that folks might want to have. And that is your advisory committee process. I hope that's all.
It was. I've got one comment. After the broker responsibility working group presentation yesterday and visiting with different commissioners, Commissioner Lerner, Chance Brown last night, I would like, and I'm trying to work on it here, but maybe a matrix of all the ideas, the thoughts, and then the next column is a rule, is it regulatory, is it legislative, what group would be responsible, can we get it done with Legal 1, Legal 2, broker responsibility class, redefining the core classes. We talked about having some for our relationship between broker and agent. Anyway, just kind of put those on a matrix and just always have them available, because I know a lot of times when we get stuff done legislatively, it's not the right time, and also something pops up. And I think we have the matrix with, every idea, good, bad, possible, not possible, and then is it real, regulatory, legislative, is that Esac? Anyway, I just think that would help keep it at the top of the mind, and then if something pops up and we can do it, we can do it. Because there's a lot of stuff that we would like to do, we can't necessarily now, but any little step we can take is a step. And so I just think that matrix being visual, instead of emails back and forth, it's like, I think things get lost in the emails. And if we did a matrix like that, I think it would really help kind of focus, and then someone can think, we can do that here. And so anyway, just a thought.
And on just kind of globally, it seems like this is kind of I see it, there's a chart. Yeah. A good chart. It seems like on this broker responsibility, improving broker supervision, mentorship, it's all kind of under this umbrella. And I keep thinking about it in multiple ways. You have an education component, you have a regulatory component, even a cultural component, which I'm starting to talk about. I talked about a risk reduction forum. If you're not going to file a complaint to correct this behavior, then you have some responsibility to correct it in your own way. Call the broker, come alongside this person and educate. You can't just complain that we're not regulating if you're not telling us about the behavior, right? And then also probably a component around improving their confidence in the complaint process. Making sure that those who complain feel like something will happen. And that's a lot of different components. I keep quoting you, Commissioner Miller, on what you said about a survey that I think happened at NAR in the early 80s about what's your biggest challenge in the industry, and it's always the other agent. That's kind of what we're dealing with here, but there are likely some tangible things we can do about it, and then some more ethereal things we can do about it.
And you mentioned something, and Abby will probably argue with me on this. As far as the responsibility to return a phone call, rests with the broker and not the agent. I'm not an attorney, but that's a very loose interpretation because the License Act very seldom refers to the agent, refers to the broker. And the relationship between the broker and the agent is one and the same. Would that have to be specifically worded to say broker / license holder, not agent, I'm sorry?
I think the proposal that they're talking about is creating a separate rule, so similar to what you see in the broker responsibility rule, but separate for sales agents, an obligation for them to respond to.
I interpret that would also be license holders, but anyway, I'm fine with that. I don't think we need to communicate to the license holders that they're not responsible for return a phone call within 2 days. Two days, I'm sorry. 10 would be nice, but 2.
And so this is a new requirement.
So
Yeah.
can you just change the word broker to license holder?
And this is what we're looking at, well, it lives in the broker responsibility rule. And so the thought is that if we are going to make this effort to call out the license holder, agents probably aren't going to the broker responsibility rule, because why wouldn't they? So, I mean, there's some reasons, but generally speaking, right, we don't want to hide a requirement in there. But I think what you're speaking to, that broker-agent relationship, right, that makes sense. And so maybe it ends up being less of a separate rule that folks can then, point to, well, I didn't have to report this rule or whatever. Maybe it's messaging, maybe it's getting that out there. And so I think that's really in the early stages. I think everybody likes the idea because that's increased responsibility and calling attention to that responsibility. Well, I don't know if it's increased, but it's calling attention to it. So I can take that feedback, work with Chance. This was actually something that he brought forward, this idea, and so we're still kind of adding it around, but I think we can get into that, if that makes sense.
It also goes back to everyone taking the responsibility.
Yeah, I totally agree with cleaning up, addressing the rule, but let's not give them an excuse for not doing it.
Sure.
That makes sense. Just more stuff Summer can do. She has nothing to do with communications right now. Just, yeah.
See, there's no these ideas.
When Scott said that to have a matrix and chart, we need to put what the broker is responsible for in legal 1 so that the agents who have to take legal 1 will be exposed to it. And it's really not so much. Is it? That's gonna be Scott, because you teach too.
No, I think that'd be awesome. Put a chart in there. It could be 1 page. And no, I just made a note. Again, that would be a group, legal 1, to put it in the writing group. Yeah.
Well, that's really helpful insight, and I know Jen's here. I am taking notes. So yeah, I mean, we can look at that, and that's similar to what Esac is doing, in that they're looking where in the courses could this be. And I think the only concern with that is if they go that route, we really want to make sure it's clear when that topic is being addressed, and it's not just like a little bit here and a little bit there, because it's harder to identify, like, yes, this message was conveyed. But that is what we're looking at, and I think any insight that you all have on that is so helpful to us to, because you do teach that class, or you're out there.
Legal 1 has an entire chapter on fiduciary. You could certainly put it in there. Relationship between broker and agent, broker, responsibility between agent, broker, and agent. I mean, to me, that would be the perfect place to put it.
And like, when to call your broker or something, in a language that is, easy to read and teach. We can look into doing things.
Jennifer, if the writing group got together and did something like that, could it be classified as an update to legal 1, or do we have to wait for the next cycle?
Good idea. Except we can't do it in 4 hours now.
I think that's a great question, but Vanessa, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that would need to wait until the next iteration.
And we can get it put together, and then if nothing else, get a good,
The other thing that we have done in our company, just because I teach broker responsibility, and I went, oh my goodness, it's any mentor needs to have broker responsibility. Of course, all the managers need to have broker responsibility. Anybody that's a supervisor at all, and team leaders.
Right, and so that's, there's a lot of talk about that broker responsibility, of course, and should its application be widened? And some of that is statutory, and so that's the stuff we're looking at. I think that matrix will help us. And I've been taking, like I said, I've been getting written comments from folks on a broker responsibility working group, and I actually have a working document right now where I'm looking at those and I'm saying, okay, well, this is gonna be a rule change. Have we contemplated how this would touch licensing? What would this mean for enforcement? So I think we can have that working document, and that can ultimately result in what you're talking about, Chair Kessner, of a matrix that's a little bit easier to digest. Sometimes when you're in these meetings, everyone gets super excited, and they're like, and then we'll do this, and then we'll start here, and we'll do this, this, and this. And so I'm trying to get a little bit more of a cohesive recap from some members, just so that I can make certain that we're addressing their ideas and bringing them back with what they need to know. So as you can see, it's not just the time frame between meetings, right? These advisory committee meetings, they cover the big topics. They are exciting. People really love to serve. We have so many applications. I'm always just so amazed by it, sometimes overwhelmed by it. But if you have any interest, if you have any insight, you can always feel free to contact me individually. If you want just an update from me, I can give you an update. But we welcome your thoughts, and those committees, they love having commissioners be involved and give that temperature level. I think it is really beneficial. That's it. So now you can just, since everybody's here, Chair, no one has to even pay any attention to what I've created in terms of a revised agenda. We actually stayed in order.
Okay, so we are to number 4, and it's Jennifer Wheeler.
Good morning again, everybody. Jennifer Wheeler, Director of Education and Examinations for the record. I'm here just to provide you with an overview of our education compliance programs. And we did a presentation for the Esac committee at their last meeting, and were asked to present this to you all as well. So I'm going to start with an overview, kind of line out the phases, and then welcome any questions you all might have. The purpose of the compliance program is twofold. One is to foster collaboration between the agency and our education providers. The other is to assist in addressing any potential concerns the Commission, Esac, or the industry have regarding the administrative functions and quality of TREC-approved pre-licensed education providers, continuing education providers, and the courses that they offer. The quality of mandatory qualifying courses is essential in providing an education baseline that will enable applicants to acquire the knowledge one they need to pass the exam, and then also serve as a stepping stone for applicants to begin and maintain a career that will assist real estate consumers, as well as promote license holders' future potential and professional growth. The first phase of the compliance program was initiated in April of 2019. Phase 1 consisted of our review of websites and other advertisements of qualifying and continuing education providers to ensure compliance with TREC advertising rules and also to support consumer protection. While we have initiated the qualifying education provider administrative and advertising audit for all, subsequent reviews will coincide with their annual fee submission and their 4-year renewal application. Continuing education provider websites and advertisements are reviewed for compliance as they submit their 2-year renewals. We currently have about 40 qualifying education providers that are licensed and about 500, just about 500 continuing education providers. Phase 2 of the compliance program was initiated in January of 2021, and that's where the qualifying education provider administrative audits began. Phase 2 consists of our audit of the administrative functions of qualifying education providers to, of course, ensure compliance with subchapter F of the rules that cover the responsibilities and operations of qualifying education providers. And with that, I'd like to give you a little bit of an overview of how the administrative audits are conducted. We first send an introductory letter to the provider, which includes 1, the purpose of the audit, a date and time proposed for an initial opening audit interview, a description of what will occur during the audit interview, a sample copy of TREC's qualifying provider administrative audit form, and the qualifying instructor verification form. These forms are part of your materials, and I've also provided you with paper copies if that's easier for you to review. You might have some duplicates there. Providing the forms ahead of time allows the provider to become familiar with what the auditor will review and will look for during the audit process. At a scheduled date, an opening audit interview is held with the provider's designated operations manager or owner. The interview is currently held remote, but face-to-face through the Teams platform, so we get the advantage of that one-on-one interaction. The meeting consists of 1, a recap of the purpose of the audit, to include a reminder that the administrative audits are not intended to be punitive, an explanation of the mission of the Commission and Esac, an open dialogue, which includes a brief history of the provider, including an ownership discussion, how long have you been in the business, what is your primary focus, be that real estate or perhaps inspector education, have there been any changes to ownership or operations that may be helpful in this discussion, and then a discussion of provider responsibilities that are outlined in the TREC rule, a review of current provider pass rates and any challenges that the provider might be experiencing, and an explanation and discussion regarding the sample administrative audit forms that were provided via email. After the opening audit interview, the auditor sends a follow-up letter requesting the following items to facilitate the action process of the audit. 1 is a list of instructors used by the provider within the last calendar year. After we receive the list, we randomly select 3 instructors and request their resumes and supporting documents to confirm their qualifications. At this time, we also request the course and instructor evaluations for these instructors for at least 3 courses that they've taught. We also request a copy of the provider's executed surety bond, other than website links, a copy of flyers or other advertising materials used to advertise course offerings. We request a copy of the current pre-enrollment agreement, access to executed copies of enrollment agreements to verify that they are signed by both the administrator of the provider and the student engaging prior to the student engaging in the course, whether that be through classroom or distance education. And then we also request a copy of the refund policy that's separate from the enrollment agreement, and we request access to student course records. Once the above documentations and information have been received, the auditor reviews them to ensure they satisfy the requirements. The auditor prepares an audit findings report for discussion with the education provider. If the audit findings are satisfactory, we schedule an audit exit interview for a short discussion, suggestions on how to improve our process, as well as discuss any items that we'd like the provider to perhaps focus on. Afterwards, an administrative audit compliance letter is issued. If audit findings are not satisfactory, we provide a list of the findings to the education provider and request a response from their operations manager or owner. Of course, we give them the opportunity to repair any outstanding issues that we've identified throughout the process. A satisfactory management response or response from their operations manager will include a appropriate answers to any inquiries that we've made, changes made to procedures, forms, perhaps website issues that we've identified. And that will result in us issuing an administrative compliance letter to the education provider. Any unsatisfactory response from the operations manager or unwillingness to comply with TREC rules can result in us sending an audit disapproval letter to the education provider and initiating a staff-initiated complaint. I would say that has not occurred. I feel like we've had a very collaborative relationship with our education providers throughout this process. It is there in case we need it, but I don't anticipate that occurring. We have had some situations where it's taken a fair amount of back and forth. I'll say that our websites, particularly those for qualified education providers, are deep and have many, many layers. And so sometimes as we make recommendations or changes to one, they have a subsequent effect on another layer. And so that can take a little bit of time. But we have found everybody to date, all the feedback has been very appreciative. Everybody feels really excited to be, to be just kind of guided in areas that they were less familiar with. And I was fortunate to get some of that feedback from some of the education providers at the Texas Realtors Conference over the weekend. And just to wrap up, the next phase of the audit program will involve the review of qualifying and continuing education courses themselves. This will include both classroom and distance education courses. And it takes some planning. We've come a long way, I think, in the last 2 years, but I think we should be able to embark on this arena of the project maybe toward the end of this year or by the first of next year. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Just one quick question. How long does it take for one of those audits? I mean, theoretically.
So we've had them, if you're right on task, we can start and complete an audit within 2 weeks. We've had 1 or 2 that have taken a little bit longer, but not due to any inaction on the part of anyone, the provider or us.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Benjamin.
What kind of coverage are you getting from all the providers? Do you usually set an approach to determine or you try to get everybody throughout the year?
Okay. Are you asking about how we determine who's audited and when? Okay. So that's a good question. Since we launched the program, we really wanted to get, in terms of the qualifying education providers, all of them. But they're all on varying renewal cycles. And so once we get through everyone, then subsequent reviews will coincide with their license expiration and submission of a new application to renew that approval.
So everybody gets audited?
Everybody gets audited, yes. So Mr. Miller,
How long do they have to correct their problem if there's a problem?
so the language we use is reasonable time. That can be defined as, many things. Typically, we request a response within 7 to 10 business days. But if a provider comes back to us and says, hey, this is a little more complex, can I have a little bit more time? I've got to get my technology expert, in on this, then we will work back and forth with them on that requirement. Because the goal is, we have the same goal. And so again, not to be punitive, not to say, hey, I don't recognize that this is a complex process. I do recognize that it's a complex process sometimes. So it might take a little bit longer.
Well, this really isn't about an audit per se, but when did it go that pre-licensing could be done online versus in the classroom? Do you know how long ago?
Oh gosh, before my time, which is 11 years. I do not.
I'm just going, if people were required to be in the classroom for at least X amount of those hours, if that would prove what we're seeing. That's why I'm.
Well, I can tell you that I can't quote the study off the top of my head, but over the years, I have looked into, success versus, classroom versus distance education. And I think the argument is pretty clear that they are both successful depending on what your learning style is.
Right.
I know if you look at the passing rates, a lot of the online providers have pretty high passing rates. Some of them are very intense. I mean, you go take the test, you gotta show the camera that nobody's there, and you even just get off the camera for a second. Yeah, some of them are very, yeah.
I believe some are proctored, right, as well?
Yeah, and some are proctored. And when they got allowed, certified, or whatever to do this, man, there was a huge screening process, because everybody was really worried about starting and watching the ball game or whatever, so.
Right. Right. Yes, the proctoring is required for all final exams for all qualifying courses.
I remember you also used to have to take a test after your CE.
There was a time, and then more recently, so I think initially we got rid of the exams for CE for classroom courses, and we maintained them for distance education courses. And then more recently, we have eliminated those for distance education courses, although they typically have some type of mastery built in, quizzes, interactive, exercises. And then even the non-elective, at least for real estate, there's a requirement to review a final exam and have an exchange, with the students who are enrolled in that class. But there's no longer a requirement for an exam. However, the instructors are required to pass.
So give it an exam.
Free.
Go ahead.
There's no prohibition. Nobody says you can't, but that was a Esac recommendation.
You do the exam and review. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
Right.
I think they allow 20 minutes. All right, any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you all.
Chelsea's going to do the initiatives, 2023.
I can do that. Morning.
Good morning.
We are going to walk through this document, which I hope you all have. It's a one-page document on commission 2022 initiatives. Y'all have that? What are your computers? Got it? No? It's in there. Sorry, girls, have the paper shop. Should have been maybe in like a supplement. Front pocket, check front pocket. We're swimming in paper, aren't we? So this has been quite a process. If you'll remember in November, we had basically a brainstorming session. That was November, right? Yes, I think that's right. If you sent in initiatives and then discussed those in the workshop in November. And we have whittled down, well, you whittled down that list to items that you wanted to focus on in 2022. There were more good ideas than what we could focus on. Some were more feasible than others. So you ended up with this list, but have not seen this initiative update document since that time. And we have worked internally many hours to kind of hone in on these initiatives and determine what we can do. And I have told staff on many occasions, these are 2022 initiatives. It's only December of 2021 or January of 2022, and here we are, it's only February of 2022, but I'm really proud of the progress that has been made on these. So I will walk you through them. And there are several staff here who's been talking much more detail about what we are doing. And if you want to get to any of those details. So we'll get into as much as you'd like to get into. If you'll remember, we had several initiative ideas that were related to enforcement. An ombudsman program. There were 3 items that were ultimately determined to be a bit infeasible, but we whittled that down to something we thought we could do. And that is, based on the intent of those initiatives, it sounded like what we wanted, and you agreed in November, I hope this is still true, that the wish was to have a less restrictive complaint resolution option. Have some way to file a complaint or to show a need for correction that didn't take so long or that had a kind of a simpler process for resolution. And so we proposed this idea of the administrative dismissal option, which is essentially the idea of sending a corrective letter. It's come to our attention that you have an advertising sign that doesn't have the broker's name as the proper size. You can correct that within 10 days, this complaint goes away. It's a dismissal without a true investigation, right? So we are working on making that happen. We've examined where there are similar processes in other state licensing agencies in Texas, and they're using some of those models. We're working with IT to determine how that would be processed within our VERSA system, because everything needs a dismissal code. We don't see that as an ultimate barrier by any means, so it's just something to overcome. We anticipate in the next commission meeting cycle, March, April, we'll have a concept paper of a more definitive plan of how to implement this process. So we're making progress on that. Questions on that? On an administrative dismissal process. Our next one is to examine the practice of wholesaling in Texas. And I'm amazed at the chatter around this initiative. You brought this to us at the same time that there was a lot of chatter among licensing agencies across the country, real estate licensing agencies. When we spoke at Texas Realtors on Friday on this topic, during that conversation, I received an email from a group or a listserv of all executive directors of other real estate licensing agencies in Texas, talking about what other states were doing. So there's just a lot of conversation around it. As you know, several weeks ago, we issued a survey asking license holders, consumers, and wholesalers about their experience in wholesaling. Summer spoke a little bit about that yesterday. We will examine the results of that survey once it closes this coming Friday. We will do the same thing once we issue the survey and get the results of that survey from TLTA on the title industry. They are going to have a lot of interesting information. From what we've seen in the survey so far, it is a lot of what you would expect. What do you think wholesalers are saying about it? Wholesaling is great. You need us in this industry. We help underserved communities. We help distressed properties, that kind of thing. Among sales agents and brokers, you hear a lot of language about being predatory, fraud, this is corporate practice. It's mostly negative in nature. It's about 50% of our respondents. And then among consumers, you have a mix of both. I didn't know there was a wholesaler in the midst of my transaction. I'm confused, all the way to this worked out great. I mentioned yesterday that Summer said, did you expect all of this chatter about the survey? I said, no, I had no idea. But there were a lot of Instagram posts and YouTube videos about what TREC is doing. They've issued this survey. They're clearly looking to regulate this process. We must be careful. We've got to get together and organize ourselves to make sure we have a lobbying effort at the Capitol. Just so they're worried about it. And so it's important for us as an agency to go in open-minded, to just seek information and see what needs to happen, and then determine what the next step is. The next step could be, no, we're fine. It could be, in Texas right now, we require disclosure to the buyer, not the seller. So perhaps the next step is disclose to the seller and even create an out for the seller to get out of that contract without, with no consequences if there's a wholesaler involved, if that's important. It could be all the way to requiring a wholesaler to be a licensed. Texas Realtors is also talking about this issue. I'm interested to see what they have to say. And we're marching towards the next legislative session. This group will have a lot of conversations about what they think needs to happen for wholesaling in Texas. So we'll bring those survey results to you, and we'll go from there. I have talked to Texas A&M Real Estate Research Center, and Gary Mailer said, well, this is really interesting. I don't think we have any way to get any of this data. And they have data on a transaction. And because this transaction doesn't look any different than the next transaction, they have no way of knowing whether a wholesaler is involved in a transaction. So they're really interested in seeing what we find out, but they haven't been a data source for us.
Can we interrupt now for questions? So please, one question is, who's going to disclose to the seller that I'm a wholesaler, and who's going to do that?
You would have to be the wholesaler, right?
Yeah, but if they are not licensed people in the first place. And so the other thing that I've come up with, that I've found is there's so many unlicensed people doing real estate stuff. And so there's nobody governing. So it's a wild, wild west, really is.
Yeah.
And if we aren't going to complain about these people who are unlicensed, and enforcement's not going to come down on them with more than stop doing that.
I read pending legislation, that's a reasonable point, and I think one that is worthy of kind of marking down as disclosing to the seller enough. If disclosing to the buyer is required now, then this is just one click further. I would hope, and this is just me talking out loud, that if there's a requirement to disclose to the seller and the seller is represented, then it would be, and the seller's representative would have to be kind of a policeman in some way, shape, or form. I don't know.
Get all this information. What is your plan moving forward? Are you going to put together a working group, or how are we going to divide and conquer and figure this out?
Once we get the survey back, then I think we work with TREC, Texas Realtors, TLTA, maybe the wholesalers, lenders, and find out which path to go. One of the, what's kind of nice or amazing about this survey is a lot of the people that are filling it out as wholesalers are also licensed. And that's, they have to abide by the License Act. I think the simplest thing we can do legislatively is disclosure to the seller. They're supposed to disclose now that, they are selling equitable interest. And so give the disclosure to the seller. And then, there's always the question, I know me and Commissioner Miller had this conversation over and over again. A 1-4 family residential contract in Texas is not assignable, like a commercial. So, if they write it as Jane Doe or assigns, it's assignable. But unless they put it as assigned, I'm not an attorney, there's not an assignable clause in the 1-4. It has to be on the parties. Is that not correct? And that's kind of a trigger that it might be. But a lot of them are doing it without it. So.
And who's going to complain?
Right. And so, I'm not sure which way we go, but we get all the shareholders involved and try to figure it out. Because we don't know what the survey says.
But Vanessa and Abby were shaking their heads. I'm going to try to interpret their shaking of the heads. It could be that I got exactly 100% wrong. I believe that contracts are assignable just based on contract law in Texas.
But do you not have to disclose assignability?
It is
So
not.
why is it in the commercial contract?
I think it's more typical in the commercial setting.
Okay. So you can assign without assign. Okay.
That's one of the things that you see come up, and you'll see in some of these responses that, like, I'm thinking for certain on one that we got from a lawyer committee of, I am in no way trying to to do anything with the ability of someone's right to assign a contract, because that's fundamentally.
It's bigger than real
Yeah, it is bigger than real estate. So that is, I mean, I think what you'll see is that's gonna be a consideration that comes up, but yeah, I see your point too, well, it's not specifically in there, but generally speaking, assignable.
So the bar I passed last night did not count.
Sure, kind of for something.
So what does the landscape look like for enforcement actions against non-licensees and wholesale
It would be the same as,
licensees?
well, no, I mean, it really is.
I'm just trying to wrap my arms around the enforcement action as a result of a wholesale transaction.
We don't see any, in general, we don't see any wholesale complaints. We don't file complaints.
Because they're accredited. I mean, if you are a wholesaler, you are simply just a middleman partner of a party to a contract, you're not licensed. I mean, you can be.
So let's just say I'm a non-licensed owner, I'm just an investor who put a property in a contract and I find somebody to buy it for, $10 for what I have it for, and I assign it to the next party. Something goes wrong in the transaction and the consumer complains. Where can they?
It would be non-jurisdictional for us if the wholesaler is unlicensed, correct, Mike?
Difficult to prove unless it's accurate. Is there a principle in the transaction?
I was just going to add to the way that the statute is structured in the Real Estate License Act is it basically says as long as you disclose wholesaler, you're not considered to be engaged in real estate brokerage activity. But if you fail to disclose, you are considered to be engaged in real estate brokerage activity, and that's where it becomes unlicensed activity at that point. So that's where we would have regulation to come in.
So the regulation that the issue that we're trying to fix here is within the licensing broker agent arena, right?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ideas kind of being bounced around. There's actually another statutory provision in the property code in chapter 5, which is where you see some of the seller's disclosure notice requirements, things like that. So there is already existing language in that statute, but we also have language in our statute. So I'm not sure, I don't know that we have an idea yet of, A, do we need to do anything? And then B, if we do need to do something, what does that look like?
And for whom?
Right.
And I can give you an example of something I've turned in the past. I had a listing and I had a contract on my listing from an individual who had then thought about maybe flipping it to a wholesaler. Well, the wholesaler wants to sell it before the option period is over or before it closes. So this guy was sending out emails as if it was his listing, like to massive amounts of investors saying, don't call the listing agent, call me, I'll show you the house. And he was setting up appointments, and then he would call me to make an appointment for himself, which he was unlicensed, and to show other people. And it happens all the time. The same company, there's a complaint about them right now.
This was a non-licensed.
Correct.
Yeah.
So the question is the consumer being harmed in that? And if so, how do you properly protect them? The ultimate protection would be to require a license. But is there some middle ground? If necessary.
Are we doing a survey with the country and asking for their input?
Yes, ma'am.
So that should give us some additional information, I would think.
I think their information will be very interesting because they're not a party, right? They're kind of at the table as among other things, kind of a facilitator or observer of some sort. So I think it'll be interesting to see what information they have. They're real interested, and I mean, they've been very helpful.
So we have protection for the licensees, protection for the consumer, protection for the non-licensee investor that enters into these type of transactions in it.
That's basically a consumer. I mean,
One and the same.
And during Harvey time, a lot of these were out, and when, like yesterday, you called that gentleman predator, they acted as though they were predators, especially with older people, people that didn't understand and trying to go get their properties at a lower price than, market value, just because they couldn't understand. And I would see these contracts with holes all through them, and they can get out to the last minute and just leave these people high and dry.
But I was just going to say, at a minimum, the fact that we're having this conversation would suggest that there's a lack of transparency, in terms of what's going on at several levels. So, it seems to me like in any event, whether it's a really good thing or not so good or whatever, I mean, the transparency aspect, the notice aspect, the sellers, et cetera, ought to be a pretty strong consideration, whatever we do.
We have found other states who are doing something about it. Of course, Oklahoma has filed a law that requires a license. Illinois requires a license if you do more than one in a year. Interesting. Kansas has a bill pending. North Carolina is examining the issue. It's moving really fast. Okay, ready to move on to the third initiative, increase education and enforcement of minimum services. This has been identified as basically an education issue. We are wanting to schedule an article for the spring to just further educate our license holders on the subject, what it means, what minimum services means. We're also examining how best to include the topic in currently available courses. Do you add broker responsibility? Do you put it in real estate brokerage? Where can you plug that in? Maybe both. More to come on that. Okay, examine and review criminal history and background check process. This was, the enforcement committee met, of course, in December and in January. Commissioner Miller reported on that yesterday. There has been robust discussions at those meetings. You've heard about a white paper being drafted. If you need a copy of that, we're happy to share it with you. That outlines the process of enforcement and it identifies avenues for where you could make changes, basically what is considered related to a license. Okay. We have incorporated the Enforcement Committee's recommendation to modify language to 541.1 to better track what word for word what the statute says on that. Additionally, there have been recommendations for changes to the website to better educate the public on criminal history background check review process. There is information on our website, but we could be doing a whole lot more to educate the public on that front. And so that is, I think Vanessa has mentioned on several occasions, casual responsibilities that we passed Summer's direction. That's on her list of improvements to make. Lastly, the conversations held at the Enforcement Committee meetings have been very instructive to staff, just on how to enforce the wishes of the commission. So, where to be heavy, where not to be heavy, where we have the discretion to do so. So it's been really instructive to all of us. Any question or want to talk through that process at all? It's interesting, when Mike and I did our risk reduction presentation to Texas Realtors on Saturday, he spent an inordinate amount of time pouring through data that's housed in our database that is hard to get reports out of, and he has collected the 13 top violations. So we're going to use that information to just get that out to our license holders to educate. I group them into two categories. One is mistakes and things all license holders may run the risk of encountering, just letting the license lapse, the business entity needs to be licensed, you didn't know that it did, and just things that honest people make mistakes on. And then you have a category of violations that require an intent to do wrong. So we're going to get that information out there, but also in that report, we looked at all the cases we opened last year. What kind of cases are those? And significant portion of the cases we opened related to fitness determinations, which is before a license, before an application is sent in. Someone saying, I have this criminal history. Well, can I still get a license? What are my chances? And then the criminal history background check process in the midst of an application process. We do more of those two type cases than we do disciplinary cases of a complaint being filed.
So the administrative dismissal.
The administrative dismissal will help with complaint, with cases that are open because of complaints, with behavioral. It wouldn't be, that wouldn't help us with criminal history. We open a case for that to process the application of the fitness determination.
You know, I'm relatively new here on the commission, but in reading the, you know, the flow of settlements, agreed settlements, you know,
Agreed orders.
Yeah, and agreed orders. Early on, I found myself thinking, well, I wonder what it would take to not be able to get a license. Because some of these things, now I've got more information on that now, we've seen some of that, but some of that, I mean, I would agree that, you know, good people, you know, miss things and the administrative nature. Of course, some of these things, I see that you know, they get some letters that say they're an asset to the community and they serve their, you know, I know there's this balance that, you know, we've got to strike, you know, but, you know, I mean, I do think looking hard at those things because, you know, I mean, protecting the consumer from this is what we're all about. And of course, you know, I would, you know, I guess I just have to say my personal experience has been over the years. We've accepted some of these probationary licenses that over half the time, you know, something doesn't go right. Let's just say doesn't mean they're bad people necessarily. You know, something doesn't go right, and you know, I end up releasing them, and I find myself thinking, yeah, I wonder how that person ever got the probationary license. So I got a bias, I guess, just based on, you know, my experience with it. That, you know, I can appreciate how difficult it is for my history, drawing that balance, you know. That, you know, with 217,000 practitioners per license use, let's say, you know, it doesn't strike me that we've got a shortage of supply, you know, and so, you know, I sort of tend to say, think that, you know, striking a little firmer line at times is not a bad thing, and yeah, I appreciate, you know, what you're doing. So.
Well, you nailed it. I mean, there's a balance between this consumer protection and then having this, I don't even think political climate is the right word, but kind of a culture in Texas, creating a way to earn a living and to granting those licenses. You do not see the denials. And we're happy to give you the information on who, on numbers, those numbers. And we're always happy that the agreed orders tend to be fairly benign in factual details, I would say. But if you ever want to hear more, we can get you the story behind an agreed order. And I sometimes ask for that. You know, there's one not too long ago that was probationary license for family violence. That seems pretty crummy. It turned out there was a woman who hit her teenage daughter in the midst of an argument, very remorseful, and was reported to CPS by an ex-husband's family. you know, and you think, well, there's more to that story. I'm not condoning hitting a teenage child, but, but okay. But we're happy to give you some of those details because sometimes it looks a bit alarming and you hear the rest of the facts and you're like, all right, okay, well, got it.
Chelsea, before you go on, maybe we can send the commissioners that study on the probationary licenses. I don't know if where the commissioner got that or not, but Michael Lloyd went back 10 years, no, till 2000, 10 years. And they had issued 1,100 probationary licenses. And those 1,100, only.
Over 11.
Over 1,100. Only like 20 ended up doing something, and only 3 during the probationary period were.
10 during the probationary period, and the other 10 something after during their license.
But 3 were revoked, correct? Is that right? Anyway.
Minimal.
It was.
Yeah, so it was very minimal, so that's like 1,080 people plus that were able to support their families. So I thought that was a good, anyway, he had it broken down, I'll forward it to you. Yeah, because I just emailed him when I say, what about this, and then I get this, yeah, so.
But sitting back on top of your experience, I think this would be interesting, which is that when you've taken a chance on someone with a probationary license, the chances of that going well might be lower for you than it was for us. So that's also reasonable. But different.
Smaller sample sets.
Right.
It's also gonna tie into, you know, what you're releasing them for, was that related to whatever their criminal history was, right?
You're
Because
saying.
those can be two very different
Well, that's-
things.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to the 5th one, examine and, am I in the right place? Yes, examine and address license portability. So this is an interesting one. This has also been a huge chatter at Arella around just having a portable license from state to state. And about the time that we started really digging deep into it, the License Portability Task Force at the Arella level disbanded. They're completely finished with their work there. What they did is they created a form that all states can use to report their license education history. So we will now use that form. We have also created a white paper on what the Texas universe is on portability, what we require, what's considered substantial equivalency. That's different for different populations. If you're in the military, if you're a military spouse, veteran, that kind of thing. So part of our work has been around is wrapping our arms around the current state of things in Texas. It's also, there are some broker responsibility working group recommendations for statutory modifications that will change education and experience requirements, which is also connected to the portability of the license in another state. And so we see a next step is really just being to put that in a potential legislative agenda item to make those changes. Similar recommendations were made by broker responsibility working group before the sunset process. Those were never moved forward really just because of the need to focus on sunset. In last session, it was a COVID session. And so this session seems to be the session where the work of this broker responsibility working group and the former broker responsibility working group, where their efforts can come to fruition. Questions on that? Yes, sir.
You know, the different states have varying ideas about what, you know, requires to get a real estate license, at least from what I understand, from, you know, Texas and probably California, Florida, soon to be over on this end of the spectrum versus some others. There's a 30-yard course, and, you know, way to go. And then of course there's other, you know, substantially different, a difference in just the practice and the representation, et cetera, issues. How do you reconcile that? Or how do you deal with, getting somebody that's coming from a state with, where they had to have 30 hours of, let's say, pre-licensed school or whatever, and then look at what we require, which I think is a good thing, and believe that, they're ready to go. I mean, just.
Well, and I think that's really the reason that we're having this conversation, is because historically that has been an individual reconciliation of sorts, that we would have someone submit the education that they received, and then we would tell them what else do they need to do to become licensed in Texas. Our requirements are more stringent than, I want to say, any other state. And if you go to Arizona, you can practice, if this is interesting, if you move to Arizona, then you can practice, you can get a license in Arizona if you have a license anywhere else. They're looking for more license holders. You can't do that if you want an Arizona license, but you're going to stay in your current state of residence. I find that motivation fascinating. So each state is really individualistic. What we've worked on doing is defining substantial equivalency and creating a more streamlined approach so that if you come in from another, a named state, we know what it's going to take. We have a specific prescription for what we need to become licensed in Texas. Mainly Texas-specific courses.
I think it's good. Just talking to peers around the country, a lot of different, a big difference in terms of requiring respect versus what's.
I think when we get that paper out, because that recommendation came out, I think before you were on the commission, when the final draft of that paper goes out, it's gonna walk through portability as it relates just overall portability, education experience requirements. So we've got some certain laws in place as it relates to military spouse licensing. And so what the Baroque Responsibility Working Group has done, and then also what the staff has done, there's been a group of staff that's been Denise, Jennifer, Tony, myself. We've been really looking at how can we get, because that term substantially equivalent, we keep seeing that. How can we get a substantially equivalent definition, which is at agency discretion, that both protects the consumer, that has that level of education and experience that, Texas has deemed to be as important as it is, but also allow for the military spouse licensing, allow for people to come from out of state. We have that direction from the governor to look into how can we open up a little bit, but also how can we protect the consumer. And so I think it does end up, that recommendation ends up being approximately a 50% tie-in along with some Texas-based courses. So it would be that requirement of get to know Texas, right? We all say Texas is a whole other world. And so that's where we're headed with that. I'm hopeful that paper will help just walk through, because it all starts with education and experience requirements, and there already seems to be a desire to toggle those a little bit. So if those get toggled, seems to make the portability issue work, especially if we can get the core classes in there to ensure that consumer protection. So I think
it's all tied together. Substantial equivalency is what our rules say now. If you have a substantially equivalent license, well, nobody does. So it's fairly useless. So people come to us saying, okay, what's the process? Well, no more for anybody if you're not substantially equivalent, because nobody is. Which, that just seems like a really terrible answer.
And it doesn't seem to shore up with the law and what we're seeing in terms of legislative and government direction. And I'm doing exactly what Steve just messaged me to not do, but he did ask me to send a reminder to talk on the microphone.
Use your microphones, I turn them on every time.
Sorry about that.
There's a contradiction, though, when the law says we have to not let anybody sell real estate until they are geographically competent. Somebody moving in, whether they're a military spouse or they're president of the United States, they don't have geographic competence. And I'm here to tell you where I live, and I've lived here for 15 years. I am not geographically competent to sell real estate there. And I was painfully reminded of that with the new legal class. One, is it class legal one? You know what, nobody, I asked several realtors that were in our area also if the required permits that are taught in our legal one class are being abided by in our area, and they're not. I live in the third largest lake in Texas, and none of those things are done. Legal two,
The group put together, the legals. Okay, well, we're gonna have to figure that out, right? This
the
is
geographic competence is the key.
anything else on this one? Okay, two more. Create mentorship and apprenticeship programs for new license holders. So this is one, the broker responsibility working group is, you heard the discussion yesterday on that Chance asked for some bumpers, guardrails, I think. And y'all provided him with some feedback on that, but I think there's a huge desire for broker responsibility working group to roll up their sleeves and do the work on what is feasible there, increase the number of transactions where oversight is necessary, or something else. And I mentioned this to you before, but I do think my drumbeat to the license holders everywhere is going to be that, you know, there's some personal responsibility in being a broker that is going to support you. There's some personal responsibility in coming alongside license holders if you're not going to file a complaint. Because some of this is cultural, and that we need to create a culture that allows for complaint filing, or alternatively allows for the correction of other professionals or teaching. In a way that elevates this license holder community. And some of it is on us, and I believe that the commission can make clips of success towards that. But it is also it's almost like a product where there's nothing new under the sun. This has been an issue for as long as there have been real estate agents and brokers out there. And then we're going to need to ratchet that down from a regulatory standpoint and educationally, but we also need to create a culture where reporting and teaching each other is current to this point.
I do have a question about that. And it's not really a question. So is any of this, and teachers would know more, discussed in pre-licensing about picking a broker or what your broker needs to do to support you? Because I got an email the other day from a friend in Austin who says, I just got my real estate license. I'm talking to brokers. Oh, this one broker really wants me on their team. They're one of the top teams in Austin. I go, so what are they going to teach you? Are they going to train you? Well, what do you mean? I know, I mean, she thought she knew whatever she needed to do in the class. And perfectly, and she goes, what do you mean? Just contracts or how to write a contract? I go, no, there's a lot more than that. I said, you need to go to a brokerage that has a training program. Forgets, didn't hear another word. Didn't want to hear that.
And I'll answer that yes, the schools do preach what you need to ask for a broker. And some applicants come in with a whole list of questions that they learned in SAE. You know, what I want,
And you support me?
But do teachers do that because they want to, or is it required?
It's required. I don't know. I haven't done an SAE in years.
Jody, please.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a good question, and that's kind of where we're going with the concept of the broker responsibilities to sales agents, expectations of the broker. We have places where the courses touch on it. We have those in basic principles courses, a little bit in agency. We have touch on it a little bit in real estate brokerage, although like we've discussed, the real estate brokerage course is really more geared towards setting up a real estate brokerage office. So I think it speaks to some of what we were talking about, what Chelsea was saying earlier, is that when you have it in bits and pieces in different places, it might not have the same effect in the way that it sticks. Now, I also think that there are instructors out there that really key into the importance of this concept and share that with, with their course or with their students. But in terms of it being a requirement, it's really bits and pieces out.
I've got a text, I can't find it, where someone sent me the part of the principles book. And like Jennifer said, some really spend time on it, and some don't spend time on it, and some spend time on it to strictly recruit. So there's you always think it's a rule, so it's in there,
Yeah,
just how much time is spent, I don't know.
I remember doing an Esac crossover, and we discussed making, more education on how to interview a broker, which could be good. It goes back to broker responsibility.
Okay, there's one more.
Well, let me comment on it.
Please.
In our Esac meeting, I think it was interesting, one of the teachers there, a very good one, she does go into that, and she's been accused of recruiting because of that.
More than that.
No good league goes unpunished.
That's right. Okay, the last one is address license expire process. So this is the concept of, how do I see these confused? I should have included this. But if a license expires, they have 6 months to renew. You should not be working within those 6 months, or to renew with fewer consequences, I'll say. You should not be working during that process, but there is something that allows the broker to vouch for the activities of a sales agent within these 6 months. So we are eliminating what I'm calling the vouch process. In terms of, and by I say, what I mean by that is that staff is drafting a rule for you to consider that would remove that vouch process. To make clear that you cannot work during this expired period. So from an IT perspective, this will require some toggling. So we're drafting a rule and exploring the IT toggle, I'll call it, to remove that process. Yes, ma'am.
Is the vouch period, like I can pay my renewal fee, but I haven't done my education requirements? Tony's shaking his head no.
No. And Tony, come on up here.
Sorry.
Because there's that, and there's two similar processes, but that's not what we're talking about. Go for it.
I've never heard of a vouch.
Hi, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to distract you by shaking my head.
It works.
There's a late renewal fee, or a late renewal process where you can renew up to 6 months. And then there's what you're talking about, which is the deferral of the education. So if you come up to your expiration period, and you haven't finished your CE, you can pay a fee and get an additional 60 days. You can continue to work during that process until you finish the CE. On the late renewal, what happens is your license is expired for that 6 month period. You late renew, which means you don't have to take an exam and do some other stuff, but we have a process in place by which the broker can vouch, to use Chelsea's, for that sales agent, and then it retroactively says anything they did for those 6 months, it was supervised. So that's the thing that we're going to draft a rule to remove. There's a similar rule for the inspectors as well, so you'll be seeing that dual drafting rule to deal with that for both.
After probably being fined, because we had an agent that just lied to us years ago. This is 40 years ago, maybe. And we were fined $8,500. $8,500 was a lot of money.
The late renewal, will stay here, because do I remember right, the late renewal, the 6 month, we're talking about here, it has not been on the books for a terribly long time.
Are you talking about the enroll period or the vouching thing?
The voucher.
The vouching thing was the previous, yeah, previous administrations of, sorry. Anyway, they're the ones that went back and said, oh, well, this late renewal period, it sort of implies this, so we're gonna put it in a rule that allows them, the broker, to look back and retroactively allow that person to essentially have not been unlicensed because of the broker's vouching that they supervise them. That's the term. It says that you're agreeing, you're attesting that you supervised this sales agent for that period of time. I don't know, if presented with that, many brokers would say no, they weren't. So, you know, it's
We
sort
didn't
of.
want another fine if we ever knew about that.
Right.
Tony, my name is Mark Woodruff. I have a question. Is there not a second box to check where the broker states they did no real estate activity during that time on that same form?
I believe that,
Here comes another.
yes, here we go.
Yeah, I think there is, because I've always been, I'm not checking the box that everything was supervised if they weren't living with me. Yeah, I didn't know it, yeah.
For the records and e-sample record licensing, we do have the option A or B on the late renewal sponsorship form that the supervisory broker can check. A says, I agree to be responsible for any of the work done from the time the license expired until the date the renewal is issued. Box B says, I'm only responsible from the date the renewal is issued going forward. But we don't have a mechanism to track how many check box A versus box B. But what I can tell you anecdotally is most of them check box A. They're going to cover that period. Unlike the example broker you provided just now, but most of them check box A.
Does the broker sign off on that?
Yes.
Yeah, that is a form that is signed by the broker.
So, Chair, I'm hoping that fulfills what you were wanting on this initiative. I know we talked about a lot of different things. The 60 extra days to complete CE, the 6 months late renewal. There's a few mechanisms for renewing length that we're hoping that we do that right.
I would like to follow up, maybe sending the forms to each commissioner, let us kind of look at them, and I'll just run it down for maybe agenda item on the next workshop, just to make sure we have the grasp of what's done.
That's great.
I mean, I think it answers everything, but I still want to make sure that.
And we'll get the rule draft, the
Yeah.
draft of the rule done and kind of
Yeah.
present you with a package of what a response. So you said it.
Okay. All right.
Okay, I think this concludes our agenda item number 5.
Okay. Agenda item number 6, I believe that's Tony Slagle. Yeah. Update on track plan.
Yes, sir, and I did not have.
Okay, let's take 5 minutes, okay? Okay, Tony, the floor is yours.
All right, good morning, Chair, Commissioners, Tony Slagle, Deputy Executive Director. I'm going to talk about the strategic plan and performance measures. I handed something out to all of you this morning. It's not different necessarily substantially from what you had in your materials. It's just a gizmo. It's just a truncated version, hoping that might facilitate any conversation you want to have about this, because it's the information in the materials was pretty lengthy and more narrative than that. I just wanted to briefly talk about the strat plan for those of you who have not been involved in the process before. So we're required to do a strategic plan every 2 years. We have not, just for your education, we have not received the instructions yet from the governor's office. Those usually come in March, but we're trying to get a head start on it this year. There is a template that the governor's office has issued previously. We're assuming it's going to be the same template they've issued in the last 3 years or 3 rounds, so we're assuming it's going to be the same. We don't know that for a fact, but this is based on that template. And also, just so you know, the strategic plan for most agencies is tied directly to the appropriation process. So it's a joint effort between the governor's office and the legislative budget board. We're an SD agency, we're not part of the appropriations process, we still are required to do a strategic plan. So we have a little bit different focus on what we're doing. There are some appendices that those agencies are required to put in that we're not, because they're budget related and appropriations related. So I just wanted to kind of paint that larger picture of what it is. So one of the things that makes it a little difficult in order to get feedback from all of you is the quarterly meetings. Since this is a process that usually takes about 4 months to complete, when we get the instructions, 3 to 4 months, usually you don't have a meeting scheduled until May. So that's another reason why we want to talk about stages to get your input on what's in front of you. And in talking internally with staff, one of the things I would like to recommend, if the commission is okay with it, is to bring any updates to the executive committee on a monthly basis until the May meeting, where you will have a document by which you can review and approve it at that point. That's kind of my thought. And then hopefully it'll be in a format that you'll be okay with approving. If not, we can at that time talk about what the options are. Sometimes the commission has delegated that approval to the chair, sometimes to the executive committee. But again, we're trying to avoid having a specific separate meeting just to talk about the strat plan, because we're cognizant of your time. So. All right, with that being said, in front of you are the agency operational goals. If you look at the packet that I handed out to you today, it's this was provided previously, but it has highlighted the statewide objectives, which all the statewide goals we have to describe how they meet that statewide objective. So those are highlighted there. The second page is, in fact, the format of the template that we have to utilize. So I just wanted you all to see what that blank template looks like. And the third page is just a truncated version of the documents that were included in your materials that go through those goals. Staff has reviewed all of these goals, and staff has no recommendations to change them or add to them. But I wanted to make sure that you, as a commission, weighed in on if there were any that you wanted to see changed or added to or amended. We can go through them separately, or I can just list them. There's the insurance standards. There's 2 parts of that. There's a licensing component and an education component. Those are 2 of the goals that we do. Then there's a goal of enforcing regulations. There's a goal of communicating effectively, and the goal of working with hubs, which are historically underutilized businesses. Those are the goals that we have stipulated in prior strategic plans. And staff, as I said, has reviewed these. They don't have any recommended changes to those. Any changes that you will likely see based on prior strategic plans will be non-substantive. We talked about how to make the narrative more straightforward, how to make it more meaningful. There's all, this is not to knock what happened previously, but it's very sort of flowery in some ways. It doesn't really get to the point. So Chelsea and I talked about a way to make that much more direct in how you provide the information based on those goals. So that's something that staff is currently working on doing, making that a little leaner and meaner, if you will. But again, I wanted to make sure that all of you had a chance to look at these goals. As I said, if you're okay with it, I'll bring updates to the executive committee and they can weigh in on this as well. Obviously, you'll have a chance to look at it in May once it's completed. And if there are any significant issues with it at that time, we can talk about how we address those. If we need to have another meeting, or if you want to direct things, something to staff to change, and then it's delegated, the approval process is delegated to somebody else. But I thought if we talked about it right now, to the extent that you wanted to, we could maybe knock some of that out earlier rather than later.
Any questions for y'all, okay with him taking the updates to the executive?
Yeah.
Which would be the final product together. Okay?
Okay, and then the second thing I wanted to address is on the metrics. So the metrics, which are not included in your packet because it's lengthy, but the commission and the board went through a fairly significant revision of those for the last strategic plan based on,
Performance.
what was I saying?
You just didn't say performance.
Performance metrics, I apologize, performance metrics. The board and the commission went through a significant review of those prior to the last strategic plan based on some of the feedback we got from the Sunset Commission report. And so the only item that staff would like to bring to your attention for possible adjustment is on the current hold time metric, which is 1 minute. The contact center does hit that metric from time to time, but routinely it is between 1 and 2 minutes. And so we were talking internally about having something that was a little bit more of a realistic goal for the contact center, something that doesn't put undue strain on them. We talked about how could we get to the 1 minute metric and below, and that would be likely increasing staff. And then there would be times, more often than not, when staff may not be as busy as we'd like them to be. So we were thinking, is that a good use of resources to devote extra staff more than we're already directing to the contact center? So one of the suggestions is that we can move that up to a 2 minute hold time, which is a more realistic. It's not saying they're not going to strive to do better than that. They'll always try to do better than that. But what it does is when you look at that metric over a time period, they're not routinely not meeting it. It's where they need to be and then occasionally be.
It hasn't been at 1 minute for more than, I believe, 2 years.
2 years.
During the sunset review process, of course, we were whittling down our hold time. And at the same time, we had one commissioner who was saying, okay, now let's get it to 3 minutes. Okay, now let's get it to 2 minutes. Now let's get it to 1 minute. And he would always say, you know, next time I'm going to ask you to get it to 0, which is great. But if you saw in your materials from yesterday the line that does this, when you have a line that does this, which it will always do, if you move down to 1 minute, you're going to dip to 0 a lot of the time. And so then you have a question of what are staff doing when it's at 0? And so from an efficiency standpoint, in our opinion, it's more efficient and more reasonable to have a goal of 2 minute hold time. So that sometimes it'll be 0, sometimes it'll be at 4 or 5 on a Monday after an okay day after snow or whatever. But we kind of hit that sweet spot. So it would really be kind of bumping it back up to what it was before. Now that we've learned a lot from post sunset, and we've righted the ship in that sense.
I actually think it was 5 minutes prior to the 2 minutes.
Okay, so it was just anecdotally
It recommended 2, and it was recommended to go to 1. And I don't know, I like to think of this as somebody, because I used to be a runner before I got so old, and somebody having a goal of running a 7-minute mile, but you might do that occasionally, but in terms of that being something that you're pushing yourself towards you want to do, but is that a realistic goal to set something a little bit more standardized that, again, it doesn't put undue stress on staff, but also is a proper use of the resources. So that's sort of what we were thinking.
How are we staffed on customer service personnel?
So thank you for asking that question, because that's another issue. Right now we have, I believe, 20 people on the contact center, and we're looking to move that up to 24. I believe Robert's going to put post positions. I guess we have 21 post positions for 3 additional. We just recently lost somebody, so we do struggle with. It's been a desire to hit 24 for some time. We never ever hit that goal, so we struggle with that. And more often than not, we're around the 20 person mark. Occasionally, recently we were at 22. I think for about 2 or 3 months.
But you have about reached your goal in staffing.
Yes, ma'am, we're currently three shy of that 24 goal. And that's,
I have told Robert to overstaff, and we've been trying to overstaff for, I don't know, maybe the better part of 8, 9 months, maybe closer to a year. And what that does is give you just a little breathing room between classes of training. But we have yet to be overstaffed just because of the turnover.
It's like that's kind of stabilized a little bit though, right? Because for a while, it seemed like they were really leaving.
we were down to about 16, and we haven't been at that number for about 4 months for occupancy. Yes, sir, it's stabilized. And as you can see, looking at the reports of the last 3 or 4 months, it's got the contact center productivity is getting significantly better because of that.
Other thoughts? 2 minutes? I mean,
2 minutes is great.
yeah.
And obviously, always striving to be much better than that.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And then the last thing I wanted to address in the strategic plan is there is a section called redundancies and impediments that we have typically, the agencies typically utilize since we do not do a biannual legislative report. We use that for issues that come up with regard to some legislative changes the agency might want to take part in. The last, I want to say 5, maybe 4 strategic plans, the inspector issues, i.e. the removing the recovery fund or repealing the recovery fund and removing the real estate inspector, that little license that's been on there every time as an indicator of that being something the agency sees as a redundancy and would like to get both of those removed. So I would recommend you keep that on there, but we got to the Senate last time, and then for whatever reason, the bill fell through, but we'd like to take that up as another legislative issue. So I would ask that that be included on that as well. And then there may be some additional items that are added to that when you see the draft in May, just based on some conversations, and then you can determine as a body, obviously, whether or not you want to include that as amendments.
I think we leave that I mean, there's certain issues that we've gotten passed legislatively, in previous sessions that had been on our list for 5 sessions. You just never know when it's going to come up, and you want it on the list that way you can act when the opportunity's there. So let's leave it up.
I mean, are you gonna have a list of what didn't get accomplished last year?
In terms of our legislative.
Because I know a lot wasn't addressed just because of COVID.
Yeah, I can get something together. I know that was a biggie, those 2 items. And then in terms of anything that was, I think it's in order for it to be meaningful, these things are actually filed and had a possibility to go through. There were some items that we talked about. One of them was that was on the previous strategic plan, was having the ability to fingerprint people for the criminal history background check, not when they apply, but when they do not the background check, fitness determination, fingerprint for that to get more accurate determination. And we got a little bit of pushback on whether or not that would be appropriate. So that was not ever, there was no bill ever filed to address that. But I'm happy to come up with a list of things that
we can go back and look at what was lost in the shuffle because of COVID, because of sunset, and just see if there were any things that remain relevant from that period of time, so you can see a complete picture.
Yeah, for one thing we had on there for a while, the ability to meet, to reduce the barriers to meet remotely, make that easier, and I think that discussion's over with, I think, so. Unless anybody has any questions, that's all I wanted to do, is just to make sure you had the ability to weigh in on this stuff. As I said, we'll bring this forward to the executive committee every month, and we'll have a draft for your review and approval at the meeting.
Any questions? All right, thank you. Okay, potential future workshop agenda. I've got a couple down. We'll throw them out there. I think by May, we should have a lot of good information and from the survey and maybe the next step on wholesaling. Maybe have some of the shareholders here and just, kind of figure out, what is the next step? I would like maybe the next step on some of the broker responsibility stuff. The working group will be, the writing group will be in place by then. Okay, and maybe a follow-up from them on what they're doing and how it's going. I'd like to maybe not put the late renewals down off the list, but maybe send it to everybody so we can kind of look at it. And then this other one's a big one, and I should have talked to Michael before I did this, but our getting rid of the complaints is just huge. I mean, 65% of them are under 6 months, which is phenomenal. I mean, that is better than we've ever been. I'd really like to have a really deep discussion on what it would take to get 80% below 6 months. And if it's staffing, then when we go into the budget process, we need to budget that. I mean, I think you're doing an incredible job, especially with the number of complaints coming in. But I think as a commission, if we can get 80% below 6 months and it just takes staff and we have the money, I think we do it. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, we cut fees a lot a couple of years ago. But if I think if the license holders knew we could turn a complaint within 6 months or even 3 months, I don't think anybody would argue paying $5 a year or $10 for a renewal to ensure that. I really don't, and I don't even think we have to go there. I'm just saying, I think that's huge, and I'm like, you know, tell us what you need, and we budget for it. Because we're gonna be out there asking for people to file complaints. And I want his team fully staffed and ready to go. So I think maybe scrub that at the next one. Those are just thoughts.
I think that's a good idea, because sometimes by the time, you know, these things go through the process, you know, the details get stale, but also the motivation lessons too, you know. So I mean, I think the sooner that, you know, they can get this.
And I'll give you a specific situation. One was filed, and it went through the process. It was answered in the process, and they also filed a professional standards complaint with the realtors. Well, what they filed with TREC, it is not a violation of the statute. I mean, it's not professional, it's not ethical, but it's not a violation of the statute. But Texas Realtors, and I should have known this but didn't, they don't act on the professional standards while there is a complaint pending. So it delayed that also. And so anyway, nothing was on our end, but I'm just thinking, man, if it was quicker, yeah. So and that's what brought this up.
Just as a note to staff, since we only have pretty much 2 meetings left before our November meeting, which I guess decides what goes to the legislative session, if these groups like broker responsibility or Esac or whoever have items that need to get maybe on that agenda, maybe we up their meetings from once a quarter to whatever it maybe takes to get it to us on time. So we do have something to go and don't have to wait 2 years.
If we're talking legislative, one of the things I would really like to see is, and we're not the lobbyers, but we could start the ball rolling, that HOA really has no jurisdiction over them. Y'all now collect their certificates and bylaws, but nobody's slapping their hand about anything. And already we see that only 10% have turned their bylaws in. And there's a deadline, June or February. But that's incredible, and I know that we have already had trouble with them saying, you know, dealing with HOAs and not having cooperation. There's got to be something that can get them on the ball.
We'll make a note of that, and I'm thinking that may be on the horizon in another TREC doesn't even do anything, you know, TREC as a licensing entity, HOAs do not want to be regulated at all. There's a lot of interest in having them regulated. I'm not talking about within TREC, but just in other places. And so I sense that may be coming. We may not be the best spot to advocate for that. We can talk about that and figure out what's happening. What we'll do is we'll sit down with stakeholders in the inspector community, in the real estate agent and broker community, with the realtors, and see what's on their agenda, and we can kind of go from there. We can support each other.
One of the problems that I also have is that builders have no jurisdiction, or no governing body over them, since it was sunsetted years ago.
Right, they used to.
Yeah, they can list their properties with realtors. And so they're here and they're involved, and we're involved with them. But again, they play by their own set of rules with nobody looking after them.
Other thoughts? All right. Miss anything?
So I've got initiatives, a little bit of initiatives recap with a focus on wholesaling, broker responsibility, the overall topic, and also the course writing, late renewals, and complaint turnaround time.
Good. All right. Motion to adjourn. Motion made, Commissioner Woodruff, second by Commissioner Miller, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Y'all, thank y'all for taking us today.